Alright guys, so let's go ahead and start creating our ocean here. So first thing you'll notice is I've created a couple more hero clouds here using the same methods. I'm just building up a little bit more of a set here. And then I've used the sticky note here and I've just grouped it all. Press C in there and then define a color and just kind of organize it a bit better and put it all in there together. So I'm going to turn off all these clouds now. And let's take a look at the oceans. So by default, we've got a couple different oceans. We've got small ocean and large ocean. We want to select the large ocean, and by default it's going to create an ocean that's 8,000 units large. And this is going to encompass our entire scene, and it's really going to take it to the edge of our map pretty much there. So, alright, so it's created an ocean surface and interior. So the surface is our ocean, and the interior is just for rendering purposes. It's creating a volume within that whole area, and that's what's going to give us our really accurate looking ocean renders that's got some scattering within the waves and all that. So what I want to do is just select these. I want to bring it up just a touch to cover our ground here. So I'm going to transform that up 5 units. And now we've got our island completely surrounded by water. Alright, so let's dive into the surface here. So if you dive into the surface, we've got a couple of things. Pretty much we're creating a grid that's 8,000 units. And this is directly linked to our render grid here. 8,000 units. And then we're scattering a bunch of points on there. The ocean that we're creating is just in a small area, and then it's instancing that over all these scattered points here, and then we're multiplying different noises and stuff on top of that, so it's a bit more random. So really we're creating an ocean just on that little area, and then we're splitting that off. We've got 2 different types of oceans here that we're blending together, and then we've got a preview node down here that helps us preview the entire ocean here, and the resolution of this is defined by our preview grid here. So if we increase our rows and columns to maybe something like 2048 and 2048, we'll be able to see our ocean better and kind of what's going on. But for our render is actually going to be grabbing all this detail from the displacement, so we don't actually need to render out or save this big geometry. We're going to be saving out the geometry with the rows and columns of 2 and getting all this information from the displacement. So when it comes down to it, we're eventually just going to save our ocean spectra here, and then Houdini is going to pick that up for rendering. So the preview is just for the preview in the viewport. Alright, and then on top of this we've got an ocean foam that's going to generate our foam. And then we're going to be able to bake it out here. And finally, you see we got this merge foam here. If we want to view our current foam on our preview render here, all we need to do is to grab either our baked or our ocean foam node here and merge that back in. And then we're going to add that on top. But we haven't set up the foam yet, so we can't see anything because there's nothing there. Alright, so let's just kind of go over our ocean spectrum here. So we've got, it's blending 2 different types of oceans to give us some more random look here. So one thing we want to consider is obviously the scale of our mountain here. So if we view all objects, which we're going to be viewing our mountain, you can see that we probably don't want these massive big waves. We really want some lower frequency waves just based on the scale of our mountain, and considering how small those little trees were, you know, these waves would be quite massive in comparison. So let's just go ahead and work on one of the oceans for now. So alright, so if we go in our ocean spectrum here, what Houdini does from the default ocean is actually really good. It's a really good starting point, and I'm not actually going to be tweaking so much of the final ocean because by default it's all set up and it looks really great, and the randomization is pretty great from the start. But I do want to make a few little changes. So in our ocean spectrum here, we've got the resolution component. It's not going to make really much of a difference since we're kind of so far away here. So a resolution of 9 is great. The grid size of 200 is going to determine the overall kind of scale of everything. And this is great by default, as since we're working with the default parameters, all the default parameters within the waves are going to be pretty good by themselves. So if we were working with different scales of oceans and it was quite different to this, we might need to start changing the grid size and the depth and things like that. But because this default ocean at 8,000 units is about the scale as we want it anyways, we're already at a pretty good starting point. So that's why the default parameters are already going to be working pretty well for us. The main thing we want to change as far as the look is all in these parameters here. So within the wind, we've got a direction. We can change which way the waves are going to be aligned to the wind. And mainly the speed. So by increasing the speed quite a lot, this will create bigger frequencies of waves that are moving in the direction of the wind. So we'll get some big rolling waves via that speed option. And the directional bias, how much of the waves are going to be aligned with the wind. So for instance, I found the speed of my waves I'm going to take to 15. And we're going to need to play blast this to kind of get a good feel of how all these parameters are going to fit with the scale of our scene here. But the directional bias, I want most of the waves to align with the wind. So by having a low directional bias, we'll have waves that are kind of staying static and not really going anyplace with the wind. So I want things to be going in one direction mainly. And then finally the directional movement, the amount that the waves are going to be moving with the wind. So I want most of the waves to be moving mostly at the direction of the wind. So I'm going to increase this a little bit, maybe to 0.85 or something. And then finally the chop. The chop is going to determine really the crest, the peak of those waves. And this will get you a lot more foam when it comes to simulation, because the foam parameter can be based off the curvature of the wave. And when we increase this to, say, boost it up way into 2, you'll see that we'll get some really high peaks of waves. Let's boost that way up more. See, now we're really kind of cresting those out. And the foam parameter, one of the parameters it takes is the crest of the wave. So by just increasing this to 1 from the default of 0.7, that's going to increase the crest quite a bit, and it's going to generate a lot more foam. Okay, so also you notice, so we got a bunch of waves going in relatively one direction with a certain speed and scale. All right, so you'll notice that we've got some flat parts here, and by default Houdini is set up, and that's determined by our wave instancing here. So you see how we've got these patches of nothing, and that's because all in those scatter points, we're determining the radius of the scale of all these instanced waves on each of the scatter points. So you'll see if we wanted to completely cover and not leave any real kind of flat area, we'd have to increase the radius quite a bit. And you'll see we'll eventually be covering all those areas. And we've got things like rotation and overall amplitude and different variance parameters. But essentially we are instancing all these parameters onto each scatter point and determining kind of how large we want that to be. And on top of that, we've got another layer of noise that's being multiplied in the mask section. So by default, if this was off, those waves that we're scattering are all the same value kind of everywhere. And we've got two types of noise. We've got contributions, so if we were to add this noise, we can either suppress those waves or contribute to the scale of it. So we're multiplying an overall noise on the entire ocean to suppress or contribute to the values of those waves. So another level of randomization here. So you'll see if we just deselect the noise and add it back, is being subtly just kind of multiplied over top of the entire ocean. And our actual ranges of what we're trying to do here is in the input and output range. So within this noise, we're going to be multiplying it by a maximum of half. If we were to take this down to 0 and say 0.2, the entire ocean is being multiplied by this noise by at least 80 to 100%. So by default, if we just keep it at 0.5 to 1, we're randomizing that for a maximum multiplication of 0.5. So that's going to give us just some good variance in this spectrum of ocean. And then we've got an overall scale parameter, which we can bring everything up or down. And once we get into the foam generation and we get a little bit better view of what's going on via the render and how big the waves are, we can start fine-tuning these parameters. But I've found that I'm going to bring everything down to a value of 1.5 here. So we're just getting these smaller kind of waves that are more aligned with the wind. And I feel that the scale of these now is more in line with the scale of our scene and our mountain.